First thing I want to do is remove the wheel. If you have these hubcaps, just go ahead and use a 19mm socket, remove all these little plastic nuts that hold the hubcap on, then you can go ahead and remove the wheel. Set this aside, and continuing with the 19mm socket, remove the wheel. With a 14mm, I'm going to break free the two caliper to bracket bolts. This bottom one, you can probably get a power tool or a socket and ratchet in here, but this top one is kind of tight just because of the parking brake cable, but I'm just going to use a ratchet wrench and get those two completely out of here. Next, you can use a little pry bar, just pry the caliper off of here. Okay, set it aside, get the pads off of here. There we go, set those aside. And now we can undo the two 13mm bolts that connect the caliper bracket to the knuckle. One's at the top right here. And remove both of them. You have to push the bracket in to get this one out just because of this bolt up here. Remove the bracket, set it aside, and you can take the rotor off. In the next shot, you'll see that I have a new bearing. Typically, what you would want to do is grab a wire brush and scrape it, or a sanding disc if that's what you need. If there's a lot of rust on here, my wheel bearing actually looks very good. Someone has recently cleaned this off and greased it up, which we will later. So even if I was keeping this, I wouldn't have to clean much. It's already cleaned up. But basically you want to have a nice flat, even surface for the rotor to mount on. Otherwise it won't sit properly, and you'll get braking issues down the line. Now with the brakes off, you can grab a hammer and punch out the old lug stud that is affected, whether it's broken, stripped, damaged, whatever it is. Punch it out. There you go. Now you take your new one, slide it in through the back. We'll grab a lug nut and another spacer. They do make lug nut installers, but if you don't have one, if you have an old axle nut laying around, you can use that as a spacer. I have this old axle nut, which actually has a floating washer on it. I'm gonna put this in like that, thread on my lug nut. Preferably, you would want to use an old lug nut and then replace this lug nut when you're done. And now you take your air gun and tighten it up until it is completely pulled through the hub. A little more. Okay, that's it right there. Back it off. And there you have it. Lug stud is installed. Let's apply some anti-seize to the outside of the hub here. This will prevent the rotor from getting stuck. It'll also prevent corrosion and rust from building up and swelling the surface up. If it's not sitting flush, you get braking pulsations and other issues. So make sure that this is covered in some rust protective coating. You don't need a lot because you don't want it to start flinging out of here once the wheel starts spinning fast at highway speeds. So just a thin layer will go a long way. Make sure you get some around this ring here. That's where the rotor will most likely seize if it does. Install your rotor. Grab the bracket, line it up, and slide the two bolts in. Start them on by hand. The torque for these two is 96 foot-pounds. That's one. And that's two. Let's get the pads in. The inner one gets a wear indicator that sits on the top. Slide it into the bracket. It's supposed to slide nice and smooth. Put the outer pad in. That one does not get a wear indicator, by the way. Now take your caliper, line it up with the pads and the caliper bracket. Line up the bolt holes and start in your two mounting bolts. Start them in by hand so that they don't cross thread. Let's bottom them out and then we'll torque them. You have to hold the slider because it's spinning. Go ahead and do so. If you're using pliers, just be careful of the boot. The torque for these is 26 foot-pounds. All right, let's get the wheel back on, put on all 5 of your lug nuts, bottom them out, and torque them to 100 foot-pounds. And if you have the hubcap, reinstall that, line up the hole with the valve stem, and tighten up these plastic nuts by hand, that way they don't strip out. Down the road you go.